this is Thrasas Pappas. He was my TA for signal processing. So
Okay, you're going back. Okay.
So he's gone through MIT for all 3 of his degrees, and was at Bell Labs for 12 years, he said. After that, and then Northwestern as a professor. And he'll be talking about perceptual image segmentation and also video segmentation.
Okay. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. First time at Google. So I'm going to talk about primarily about segmentation and semantic classification, but I also want to mention some recent work with structural similarity metrics. This is one of the most exciting developments, I think, in image quality and image and video quality metrics. And what we are thinking about is to do perceptual tuning of those metrics, incorporate explicit perceptual models, quantify basically distortion, and one aim maybe is to do what we call structurally lossless compression. If you have a baboon and you comb his hair or her hair differently, it doesn't matter as long as it looks good. But it also has very strong implications for texture similarity, the texture similarity aspects of it for retrieval. And finally, another thing I would like to mention, and if you have interest, I can talk offline about this with you, is we've been studying image quality across different resolutions. It's a topic that really has not received much attention, but is really very important. And then, so the perception of distortion changes, but also the perception of the signal with the resolution. And finally, display devices, how the display device affects quality. But now I'm going to concentrate on segmentation and semantic classification. So the motivation here is that we have huge amounts of data, and especially in the consumer market, you don't annotate each image you take, and you accumulate images, and before you know it, they have their large numbers, and you don't know where they are. So it's like an automatic way to organize the data, and we want to do it in an intelligent fashion, I mean, by semantics. So we want to be able to automatically extract semantics from the images to organize the data. Now, this work actually started several years ago with a collaboration with IBM T.J. Watson Research Center. And what they wanted to do, actually, it was precisely visual Google. They loved Google, but they thought it's only words. How about visual Google? So I think that now everybody recognizes this. So let's see how we go about this problem. So we have images, and actually these images don't have to be high resolution, or, I mean, those were thumbnails we had, and they were compressed. So we really want to, any content you have, to be able to deal with that. And what you see in the middle is actually hand segmentations, but I'll show you how the automatic segmentations work. And if you have reasonably good segmentations, and you can reliably assign labels to some of the segments, not necessarily all of the segments. For example, you have a forest and you have sky and water. You can be fairly confident this is a landscape. And similarly for cityscape, or I mean, if you can identify people, you can classify the images. Now, so the challenges are, what are the important semantic categories that people use for classification, and then how to link low-level features to these categories. Now, the first problem was addressed early by the IBM group, and there's been other work on this, but that was one of the earliest, Moisilovic and Rogovic. They did studies. They put images on a table, and they gave people images, and they asked them to arrange them on the table according to similarity. And then they calculated the distance, did the analysis, and they found that the important semantic categories, for example, natural versus man-made was an important distinction. Does it contain images, people or no people was another. And they had a whole hierarchy of categories. And their conjecture was, well, and many people have conjectured that you can derive these categories from combinations of low-level image features, but it wasn't clear exactly what features. So that's what we wanted to investigate. So you have the low-level primitives, and you have the high-level semantics that people call this the semantic gap. And we think that the key to bridging this gap is to have really good segmentation. So we are aiming for perceptually uniform segments. Now, to do that, we think that the key to getting perceptually uniform segments is to understand human perception and signal characteristics. And I guess Oppenheim would have said that. Once you have the segmentation, then you can derive segment descriptors and do statistical analysis and be able to classify based on that. So I'm going to primarily be talking about assigning labels to segments, but the ultimate goal is scenes. So just to emphasize the segmentation part, I guess if you look at the different approaches in the literature, some just say forget segmentation is not important or is not reliable. One approach is to just break the image into blocks, analyze the blocks, and hopefully this is good enough. And some approaches are based on that. You can have different segmentation techniques. One technique that is actually very, very appealing theoretically, but in practice maybe not working so much is normalized cut. I mean, this is one example where it fails. And then this is on the right is what I'll be talking more about. So now I'm going to take a step back and describe some work on segmentation that one of my first projects at Bell Labs, which is an integral part of the approach I want to present, but first we deal with images without texture. Now you probably all know the k-means clustering algorithm, a remarkable algorithm, but has no spatial constraints. So if you take the image on the left and do 4-level clustering, you get the image in the middle. Noisy because no spatial. You notice that the intensities here change on something that is perceptually that is uniform, but the intensity changes quite a bit, and well, the algorithm breaks, and this edge here breaks, so it doesn't account. It assumes constant intensities. This is the result of the adaptive algorithm. So k-means clustering is based on the histogram, no spatial constraints. Each cluster is characterized by constant intensity. We want to add spatial constraints, and for that we use the formalism of Markov random fields. And we want to make it adaptive, that is, we want to allow the clusters to be spatially varying. So our texture model is a very simple texture model, no other texture, just spatially varying means, so smooth, but spatially varying, plus white Gaussian noise. And we can formulate it as a maximum a posteriori problem. X is the distribution of regions, just the labels, and Y is the observed intensities. And I'm going to be talking about grayscale, but it applies equally well to color. And if you use Bayes' rule, then you have you can break it into the a priori density and your conditional density, and you need to maximize that. So what that translates to is, if we look at k-means, you have intensities. S is the pixel value, the pixel location. So you just want to pick a few characteristic values, the mu's, okay? And the superscript x just tell you which one to pick. You just pick the characteristic value that closest to your data, and you minimize the squared error. Well, the new formulation is a generalization of that, in that we allow the cluster centers to be spatially varying, so put an explicit dependence on S. And then we add another term, which is the spatial constraint. And you have a balance between these. And actually, I mean, this has some parameters, particular one scaling parameter. So either you change that parameter, we call it beta, or you change your estimate of the noise, and that's what controls the balance between these. And I'll show you how we can change the segmentation. Okay? Now, the key to estimating, I mean, the problem is before you had to just estimate four characteristic values, and now you have to estimate 4 characteristic functions. So you have a lot more to estimate. So how do you do that? Well, our idea is adopt the approach of k-means, which is alternate between estimating the segmentation and estimating the characteristic values. So what k-means does is the blue and white here are just the labels, but under that there are the intensities. So k-means would average all of the intensities in the blue area to get one characteristic value, average all the intensities in the white area, get another one, and then do the clustering. Well, instead of using the entire window, we use a smaller window, so we only average locally. So this gives you localization. Now, the problem here is if you make the window too small, you integrate over a small, average over a small region, so you don't get a reliable estimate. Okay? If you make it too large, then you get no localization. So the solution is start large while you have bad segmentations, make it robust, and as you get better and better segmentation, shrink the window size. As your segments get better, you can afford to localize. And it works very well. Okay, so this is the adaptation now. Again, k-means in the middle and adaptive clustering on the right. An added benefit is you are not as sensitive to the number of labels, the number of region types. K-means with 4, k-means with 2, you just lost entirely this region because of the dynamic range. The adaptive one recovers and recovers the structure. Of course, I mean, if you are 2 levels, you have to have a few extra transitions that are not there, but the main edges you get. So you have a few spurious transitions. Those are unavoidable. So if you have this type of image, you really need 4 levels, I think, is right. And if it can be a little deeper there, it may relate to the 4-color theorem. There are some interesting questions there. But 4 works fine. Just to show you what happens with intensities, this is just one scan line of the image. The constant in the cluster centers of k-means, if you do the segmentation, well, this happens to be an OK model for this line. But here, it's just between 2, and it doesn't give you a good segmentation. If you let the algorithm adapt, then your levels follow closer the intensities. And when you do the segmentation, you have a very, very nice model of the image. So here is actually the original, the labels, and this is the reconstructed image. That's your underlying model. You have smooth intensities, varying intensities with sharp transitions. I didn't think of this initially as restoration, but you can think of this as a restoration algorithm also if you think of the detail as being noise.
Quick question, what's the 7 by 7?
That's the smallest window size that we converge to. Okay? So we start with full image, and we go down. Yeah. So, and actually, I mean, if you reconstruct, you can reconstruct with any window size. Here is another example, I mean, a 2-level example here. An image, again, with quite a bit of dynamic range. K-means finds the optimal 1 threshold, but it just happens to give you some details, but lose other details. When you adapt, you can get, for example, this airstrip there. You can get the now, I didn't have faces in mind, but we tried it on faces, and actually, it did OK. So here is Al. For those of you who don't know, this is Al Oppenheim, and I have his permission for this. So the reason first of all, one thing I want to show is actually does remarkable sketches. I thought, I mean, at Bell Labs, I was in high demand for a while to make, for anybody who retired, to make their portrait with this. And you can paint it if you want. It looks like a watercolor. But what you see here is I change the parameter sigma, or if you conversely, the intensity of the Markov constraint. And what it does is it makes the contours smoother. But you don't lose the important edges. The mustache is always there. Unless, I think he saved it recently, though. So, but it's not sensitive to the parameter settings. I mean, that's one thing. But the other thing that is nice is you can control the smoothness of the contours. OK, now let's move to time first, and then we'll move to texture. So we want to extend this idea to time, and we actually did that early enough at Bell Labs, make it spatio-temporal. The problem with this adaptation at different window sizes, when you go to spatio-temporal, it becomes a computational nightmare. By the way, this algorithm, when I started, was like, would take me 20 minutes for a 512 by 512 image. Now it goes like that. So computation, that tells you that computational constraints, you shouldn't be intimidated by computational constraints. But this becomes a little too much, the spatio-temporal version of this, the straight spatio-temporal version. But you want to extend the constraints to 3D, the MAP the MAP approach, and let's keep computational efficiency in mind. Now, the related topic is background, what people refer as background subtraction, basically detect moving objects. So you have a model of the background, you subtract it, the idea is, and you keep everything else is foreground. Now, what we found, we thought that this would work for that, and maybe with very little modification, but actually we had to think carefully about it. The thing with background subtraction is detecting foreground objects is you want to have very high sensitivity. You don't want to miss foreground objects. So that was in, there should be an asymmetry in your constraints. Okay? So what we wanted to do is combine background subtraction ideas with this spatio-temporal segmentation. And actually what we found is that, especially if you do it in a recursive way rather than just average over a window, but you compute it recursively, that actually you decrease the computational requirement per frame rather than increase it. So it works very nicely. And let me just review quickly some of the, oh, I don't have that. I'll review that. Let me just show you the 3D algorithm, how it works, okay? And this you may recognize as Yelena Kovacevic. So there is a video. Unfortunately, I don't have the audio, but we also have very nice lip synchronization here. Now, if you segment each frame independently, what you get is you get this jerky motion. You notice that there are some segments that come in and out here. There is no spatial constraint. If you extend it to spatial constraint, not only a Markov constraint, but also temporal adaptation of the intensities, then you get a very nice, smoothly moving. And I mean, the shadow moves a bit because that's a very weak edge, but all the other edges are very nicely preserved.
Well, there is a big bar that kind of appears on the face.
This bar?
Yeah.
You have to have, I mean, you have to use the shadows to make the contrast. I mean, you cannot delineate the chin unless, so this is a bit artificial, but you get a fair, I think, a pretty nice representation. Again, this was something was not what the algorithm was intended for, but actually it has very nice lip synchronization. So we are, anyway, I don't know, I'm not sure what the application of this is. I think it's a nice, this is a SIF, I think, yeah, SIF resolution. Now, a few words about background subtraction. Again, what I said is that you need a model of the background, and everything that doesn't conform to the model is foreground. But most of the techniques, and there are some interesting issues, what they call the sleeping person, is if you have a foreground object that all of a sudden becomes still, or the waking person, something that is still, you pick up a suitcase or something, you have to decide how to handle these, and there is an issue with shadows. But most of the approaches, what they do is they look at the statistics, and I was talking to Rama Chelapa recently, and he said, of course, these are not signal processing people, he says, these are computer scientists, so I guess the computer science approach it makes a lot of sense, and it's very concerned about the computational issue. You just look at one pixel over time and collect the statistics. But nothing prevents you from looking spatially also, and you should make it more robust by looking spatially. So there are two main approaches, and they're beautiful theories. Stauffer, adaptive mixture of Gaussians, and I won't go into the details, but this is kind of the parametric approach, and there is El Gamal and Davis. This is in University of Maryland. A non-parametric model, again, works beautifully. But what both of these lack is the spatial dimension. So we wanted to introduce the spatial dimension, and initially only with the smooth intensities, eventually with texture, but we haven't done the texture yet. Now the thing that is, well, here is an example, okay? So here is an indoor scene, and this is the Stauffer-Grimson approach, this is the El Gamal-Davis approach, and this is our approach. Without no post-processing, this is how the raw. So I think we do okay, and now we're collecting more systematic data. These are a little bit noisy, but I mean, notice notice the suitcase. He leaves the suitcase. I mean, that's maybe it's important to know that this was not there, and so in this case we really want it detected there, and also the other guy picks up something, and that is also a change. So you detect that.
Would the other methods benefit from the initial noise reduction of the image? Because the image itself is pretty noisy.
You mean pre?
Yeah, but just before.
I mean, you can do a lot of things, but my principle is incorporate the noise in the algorithm rather than do pre-processing. But of course you can do that. And actually post-processing you can do. You can remove it afterwards. But when you remove it afterwards, you don't know what the intensities are, so you have the danger of is it signal or noise?
Sure.
Okay? So the nice thing about this approach is everything is integrated, and you have a balance, and you choose. And you make crank your a priori parameters to control what you're doing, but it's always dependent on the data.
Can I ask you a quick question
Yes.
about the spatial temporal? So the left square thing is the bookcase, the first person.
Sorry?
The briefcase.
Right.
So with the small right thing, does
This
that
one?
come up? Yeah. Because
Yeah, this is something he picked up.
So that's the background, but because it wasn't there.
Yeah, if it
Right,
is,
okay.
yeah, because it changed. I mean,
Right,
that's
yeah,
you
yeah,
detect
yeah.
changes.
I'm just curious.
But those, if you can change things, if you don't care for that, after a while you can make it disappear. I mean, Stauffer had explained that very nicely. Now, here is showing the combined one. So we do the segmentation, and on top of that you have the foreground detection. Again, I'm not sure if this is exactly the same as the previous one, but we found that you can do it very nicely. And actually, in terms of computation, we really are doing better than, we are somewhere in between the other approaches. We really can be close to real time. So in a sense, we combine the best of the two approaches and add more robustness. I mean, what is important, one of the issues that is very important is that the El-Gamal approach requires a very long initialization stage, which is a drawback. The Stauffer doesn't need any. We just need just a few frames. We just run segmentation over a few frames, still segmentation over a few frames, and that initializes the algorithm, and then we can go recursively. Okay, so here's just another example, an outdoor scene. This is the new Ford engineering building in Northwestern, and they had a camera there to record the construction, but we diverted the camera to get our data. So you want to, I mean, that's interesting because the trees are outside and they move, and you want to detect the cars, not the trees. Okay, so now I can move to the texture. How do you deal with texture? Now, if we are interested in natural textures, photographic images, and natural textures combine color information with spatial texture, and you need to deal for both of these, and they have non-uniform statistical characteristics. So this is a roof which you perceive as uniform, but because of perspective, lighting changes, statistically it's not constant. Another roof, these are Greek roofs, I don't know if that's typical roofs, but this is a forest here, and water, I mean, you see that changes quite a bit, but perceptually, we think of them as one texture. So how do you deal with varying textures? Well, one of the problems here is, first of all, the variety of textures is huge. But even, that's one aspect. The other aspect is even within the same texture, you have quite a bit of variation. So if you want to estimate the statistics of the roof, you don't want to do it over the entire region. You want to do it locally so that you adapt. Well, if you do it locally, it means you have very few pixels. You cannot estimate many parameters. So you want a very small model, a very, very small dimensional model. Just to contrast with some of the work in texture analysis synthesis, some of the most impressive work by Portilla and Simoncelli, original textures on the top, reconstructed textures on the bottom, is really beautiful. He even tried to reconstruct Dick Feynman as a texture, but that failed. But it's a beautiful paper, 700 parameters. There is no way you can do segmentation with that. Okay? So, fine, we can characterize textures, but we don't care about analysis synthesis. All we care is about segmentation. So we are going to have much simpler models than that. Now, if I can find my cursor. So the way we do it is we start with a color image. We apply the adaptive clustering algorithm. We get the local intensities. And now, remember, if we have a number of classes and we set it to 4, in any area we have up to 4 colors. But because it's adaptive, as you slide your window, the colors can change. But at any point you have four colors. And this acts like as a local histogram. But it's not a raw histogram, it's a more elaborate histogram. And also we look at just at the gray level component of the image and look at the wavelet coefficients to find the energy in the different subbands, and that characterizes texture. So in this case, for example, this is smooth, complex, horizontal texture. And it's rough, but it gives you an idea. Finally, we combine these, and that's not a simple way we combine it, to get the final segmentation.
So so just to make sure I understand, you're doing an original segmentation based purely on the color?
Yeah, that's the color one. The color works beautiful for smooth areas, but in texture areas, it breaks it into many pieces.
Right, and then on top, each color region, large color region, you then allow your 4-color were your for function fitting that you described earlier?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you get two colors in that area, or more. Right? So the two ideas is the color composition and the texture. For color composition, we want to exploit human perception, dominant colors. So we say the human eye cannot simultaneously perceive many colors, even though with adaptation can perceive huge number of colors, but simultaneously when we look at an image, we say this is green, blue, and white. I mean, we don't care about details. And so how do you detect these dominant colors? If you decide that you need dominant colors, well, the current number of approaches, you can use LBG algorithm, you can use mean shift is a very popular algorithm. None of those adapt to local characteristics. So we want to make it spatially adaptive. That's why you use the adaptive clustering. And here is an example. So this is the mean shift, the original image. You notice that it breaks. I hope you can see the details. It breaks it into many, because the water intensity, it changes the intensity of the water. Similarly, the sky, and even the forest changes quite a bit. We smooth over this, slowly varying. So in this case, we ignore the texture. The forest texture is too fine to Of course, if you had a bigger image and you had multiple scales, maybe you would catch the individual things. But in this case, it just smooths over.
So actually, I noticed on the previous image that the bridge in the background,
Yeah, some things you'll miss.
But I noticed also that when you had your temporal aspect, you had lots of little details that showed up on the street, for instance. So you had the people walking and stuff.
Yeah.
Does adding time make a big difference in terms of finding smaller features?
It depends. I mean, I'm not trying to find too small. I mean, it should be a few pixels. But we want to detect the people moving.
Yeah.
And that's a very noisy camera. Actually, I want to take images with better quality camera. Because it depends on I mean, but...
Asking the same question in a different way. Were the parameters for how large the final averaging window was, were those parameters set differently for those two sequences?
No, those are not. No, those are not. No. But generally, it's not sensitive to parameter setting, the adaptive clustering. Well, it's not catastrophic. I mean, you can change, have an effect, but it's a continuous effect. It's not.
So kind of going back to that, then it seemed like there was a transition. So the one with the people walking on the street did not include color segmentation. The one with the bridge.
I am not sure that actually they maybe did. I mean, I have to talk to my students.
Definitely had the color segmentation as the primary.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, instead of having a scalar, you just have a vector, the same ideas. It doesn't matter.
And then
Yes.
beyond that, you do within the color, you then do that function segmentation to for region, right?
It
So
is.
for the region, for the texture modeling within a dominant color, you do the for.
You have you have the four levels are across color. It's not for each color separately. It's just a vector. No, it's one thing. I mean, they're not four per color component. It's four total.
No, but for per color region. So you do.
Four. I mean, you just find at every point you have four characteristic functions, and those change over space. So you have four characteristic functions, each of them characterized by an RGB value or LAB.
So if you go back a slide to the one with the.
Can we go back to the ACA?
You can or go forward.
Oh.
So either of the color ones. So on this one, are you? So let's go forward first.
Actually, I'm not 100% sure that in his implementation he used the color, but you can.
Okay.
Because he was very, I tell my students, just solve the problem, don't worry about computation. But this particular student was like, I'm going to do it real time. So maybe he didn't use it, but it's okay, you can use it.
So let me understand the subsequent slides though.
Okay.
So if you
Oh.
look at the bridge, for example.
Oh, sorry.
The next
Back forward.
Oh, here.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in this one, my question is kind of, is the characteristic functions, the four characteristics functions that are being fit to this image, are there four for the whole image, or are there four
For the whole image, but the four, when you go to very small window size, you don't have data to estimate the function everywhere. So initially the four exist everywhere, but as you get smaller and smaller, you don't have green data to get an estimate up there, but you don't need it anymore. I actually have, if I just look at my hidden slides, here are the characteristic functions. This is for a two-level segmentation, but this is at some level of adaptation, and actually you see the Jaggis is some computational trick to avoid the, doing it at every point. We do it in a sparse and then interpolate. But you have the two levels, and then this is the lighter function, and this is the darker function. And these propagate as you converge. And as the window size gets smaller, you only have estimates near your current estimate of that region. But you have four, in this case 2, in general you have 4 images that are your characteristic values. And then when I reconstruct, I take the segmentation and use it as a mask, and I say here replace this, in the white areas, in the black areas replace that. That's how I get my reconstruction. Yes?
I think that the segmentation using the texture, the spatial frequency information is very successful, but the reconstruction is extremely stylized.
Wait.
It's satisfying to see
No,
the water
I'm not trying a reconstruction there. I'm just showing the segments as this color here. Remove. It's just an indication what is where. I'm not trying to. I don't mean this as a reconstruction. I mean this is just a label. This is forest. This is sky.
In the picture of the mountain and the sea, or the water,
Yeah.
There's an image that
Yeah.
may just be a paint-by-label characterization, but has many of the qualities of a reconstruction.
Right. I mean, you think of it as a smooth, but smooth within region and not across regions.
It's very satisfying to see the water reproduced in that way, because we're used to seeing water with smooth gradients
Right.
across it. But of course, the character of that water is very different from the water in the initial photo. And so the spatial frequencies of the reflections on the water surface are completely lost. As
Right.
are the
But I don't mean it as a representation of the scene there.
Well, having segmented,
Yeah.
of course, you could fill in the texture with some canonical representation of the texture.
But right now, yes, I'm ignoring that texture. And you're right, that texture could be important for classification. I mean, if we could just have it's a matter of scale, though. If you had a more high resolution image, maybe you could detect that as texture. But right now, yes, we are ignoring that. And we're ignoring the details in the forest also. But it depends. I mean, it depends on the scale issue again, and viewing distance should be a factor there. But you're right. We're ignoring that. Does that answer your
I don't
question?
think you're ignoring them. I think you're capturing them. It's just that if you wanted to make something more like a reconstruction, that characterization would permit you to fill in something like texture.
Okay, but I'm interested in detection labels. I mean, to get to labels. I mean, you can do a lot of things with this, and sure. But right now, I'm throwing that away. Okay? Yes, please. No.
What I'm getting at in this picture, there's that bridge in the background.
Yeah, that
What would you have to do to capture that as a classification?
Well, actually, this one is. I mean, I've worked with this algorithm many years. This is a very, very fuzzy transition there,
Sure.
and that's where the algorithm. It's like your model is slowly varying intensities by sharp boundaries, separated by sharp boundaries. That becomes a slowly varying intensity at this point. So it's really the model cannot capture.
So features like that are really difficult to capture.
Yes. I mean, if that was the only feature you had, you might have captured it. But the thing is, the algorithm is adaptive, so it will capture the most significant differences in the area.
And the
That's
number
how.
of segmentations determines like how many different classifications of objects you can have, or
Well, I'll talk about the classification. Yeah.
So it seems like you originally captured, the color composition does capture at least part of the bridge that then goes away in the segmentation.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. That because of when we combine things. This is just the colors, and then like here you capture a lot of information, but you want to do away with it. So I mean, it's not magic. It won't capture every detail. I mean, we want to capture the most significant. I'll show you where it's not. That is not perfect clearly, but I think it works very well. I mean, I'll show you more examples. But here there is just one side comment. Notice because the intensity of the sky varies too much, it assigns a different segment. But it's very easy to remove that because you have the localized intensities. All you need to do is calculate the intensity difference across the boundary, and you have a very nice criterion to remove it. No problem. If you applied that in any other edge, you wouldn't remove it. So let's move on. Now, so our feature then becomes, and again, people have worked with dominant colors, Manjuna's group in particular, and others. Rather than have, I mean, the representation is color value and percentage of colors, but rather than have global characterization, we have a localized characterization. So our characterization is in a localized neighborhood at pixel S, and then we have a percentage and a color. And in a small window, the colors are roughly constant, so we just approximate them as constant, but as you move around the image, they change. Now, what you also need if you are going to decide on texture similarity is a color similarity metric. And that's not a trivial issue, and Mojsilovic spent a lot of time, and others, again, Manjuna's group, and on that. But if you have two color histograms, how do you compare them? And the solution that Mojsilovic proposed, and I think is very nice, I mean, for example, here, if you have like 4 colors, the question is, and different percentages, if you match these colors that look similar, then one is left over, and you don't know how to match it. So what they suggested is quantize the color space, and then just find the matches between the quanta. So then, I mean, first you do the obvious matches, and then what's left over, like that one, for example, has to match with the red, and you find that. So that's the optimal color composition distance, and we use that.
So is that like the Earth mover's distance? Or
It's not. It's different, but
does it perform as well as
to tell you the truth, I have to ask my student on that. This works quite well for us, but I cannot answer that question. But yes, we did compare to their small distance, but I don't want to ask to answer this quantitatively. Okay. So this again, I mean, it's fairly intensive computationally, but because we have only up to 4 colors, that is not a big issue. Now let's talk about the spatial textures. We look at the grayscale component, and others have tried other. I mean, this is just our choice. So we ignore the color as far as spatial texture is concerned. Then we do multi-scale decomposition. You pick your favorite wavelet or steerable filters, Gabor filters, whatever. It doesn't really matter. But we think the wavelets, they don't have the plus and minus 45 distinction, so we picked the steerable filters. But Gabor work equally well. But the problem is, if you look at the energy at the subbands, it's sparse. Even if you have a uniform texture, the energy is sparse. So you need something there to consolidate, and we use a local median operation. So just to show you, well, this is the steerable filter decomposition. Actually, because the images are very small, we only use 1 scale, but you can extend to multiple scales. So here is what we do. At every point in the image, we get the energies in a different subband, and we compute the one that has the maximum energy over the 4 subbands, the 4 directions. And we also remember what the index is, which direction it is. So first, we just cluster the energies and find smooth areas with no energy in any direction, and non-smooth, which has energy in some subband. Then, for the non-smooth areas, we have a histogram of the different directions, and if we do a median, that's how we obtain this. So notice, even in this area where there are clear horizontal edges, there are other locally there are other directions, but if you do a median, it goes very nicely. And an advantage of the median also is it doesn't respond to energy in the subbands because of edges. You just want to respond to texture. So the median seems to works very well. So this is the rough edge map we get, and we have basically smooth, complex, horizontal, and then also vertical plus and minus 45. Now, you can extend this to multiple scales, but let me not, I mean, I can come back to that if somebody is interested. Let me skip it for the time being. So then the goal is to combine these two, and we first combine this by some region type growing approach. So this part is a bit heuristic, but you get a crude segmentation, and then you want to refine the segmentation. The problem here, the question here is, because texture needs to be estimated over a window, does this mean that you are limited in resolution because of that window? And the answer is no. The way we do it is, again, the same idea of adapting window sizes. So if you think of this as your initial segmentation, we want to refine it and actually look at the refinement has very nice, but has very nice localization. So how do we do that? It's again this adaptation idea. Let's think of the solid line being your current boundary and the dotted line being your the actual boundary. So you have some error here. You use a large window, and over that large window, you estimate the statistics of one region and then the other region. You don't want to do it over the entire image again because you have no adaptation. You want to make it large enough to be robust. And then you compare to the statistics of this small window, and then you decide whether this pixel should go one way or the other. And slowly, you just shrink the outer window until you converge. And the inner window, maybe you also can adapt a little bit. But at least you need a 3 by 3 window to get some texture. So we get to almost 3 by 3 is the resolution that we get. Now, there is another issue here, that is, there are several parameters that you need. You have parameters to decide if something is smooth and non-smooth, and you can do it by clustering, but that seems ad hoc. And then you need some numbers for the similarity of textures. How do you get those numbers? So we thought, why not get them with subjective experiments, based it on human observation? So that will affect mostly, well, in this case, you'll see the texture classes change and the final segmentation. So this is with and without perceptual tuning. Sorry, again, okay, so you notice some difference in the texture, and then, but also the color similarity. You get a bit of a difference. I think you get some improvement. So we are doing we want to do systematic text to show this consistent improvement, but overall we found that it helps. So the way we do the perceptual tuning is we want to decide, again, the smooth versus non-smooth, thresholds for dominant orientation, and threshold for color feature similarity. So we collected a bunch of textures, and then asked people, we showed them textures, and we said, notice this is not constant, is this slowly varying, is directional. And finally, we also allowed them, if there is something like this, which is not a texture, but it's to reject those, and those we didn't use in the training. And then we showed them textures and said, again, tell us, are these similar textures or not? And there were four options there. And then we did statistical analysis and set the thresholds. So here are more results. I mean, you can see it's not perfect. I mean, here I would have preferred this line to be maybe a little lower here. But even though it's not intended for faces, it even doesn't fail very badly there. Obviously, it merges the eye with the texture of the background. But I mean, you get an idea. Look at this image, for example. I mean, I think it's reasonable, even though not perfect. And this is the perpetrator. This is Chun-Chin Chen, who did the segmentation work. Okay? So now, that was a very quick coverage of the segmentation algorithm. I have to say it's computationally very intensive still, and that's one of our interests, to make it more efficient. Once you have the segments, how do you extract semantic information? So we look at our features, but now on a segment basis. So take a segment like that, and you have the 4 colors in the segment. Well, there are 3 here, okay, up to 4 colors. And you see the percentages, and you see the intensities here. And we have the textures. And it's a histogram. Now, if you think of how you're going to do this information extraction, I mean, you want to put things in a vector, there is an asymmetry here. I mean, in the textures, we have labels and the percentages. All you need is the percentages. With the colors, you have both intensities and percentages. So our first thought was, let's quantize the color space. And that makes a lot of sense, because people don't care which red you have. They just care it's red, green, blue. So we looked again at color naming, and there is a National Bureau of Standards specification, and Mojsilovic worked on that. So you can have many colors, but we really care to have a few colors. And then if we look back at actually the Human Vision Conference in '89, Boynton suggested 11 colors that are almost never confused. So let's work with those. So we had 11 colors, then we added a few more, up to 15 colors, kind of independent colors. So then you make a vector and you have the percentages. And that works okay. So we have, of course, we need a set of labels to try to. So here is our hierarchy. We ignore people and animals. Animals because it's too difficult. People because you can do Viola Jones or one of many very nice algorithms in the literature. Do it separately. After all, our brain also has a separate part to process faces. So let's ignore faces. So there we have a hierarchy. man-made versus natural. Natural we subdivide into vegetation, sky, landform, and water. And then we have further subdivision here. I mean, we don't hope to get everything. You cannot distinguish car and boat, for example, but what we can do with some of these categories, like buildings probably we want to get. So then we do the training with a lot of images and classification using a linear discriminant analysis, and these are the results. So we have recall, which is the number of correctly classified segments over the total number of segments in the relevant category, and precision is the number of correctly classified segments over the total segments that the algorithm detected as in that category. And our numbers, I think, are quite competitive. I mean, again, you don't have direct comparisons with the literature, but they are quite good. Now, notice, I mean, we do some categories we do very well. We have some problem with water because it can be confused with sky, but it's OK. Now, what we found is that if instead of using the 14 or 15 colors, if we used the first dominant color and ignore the percentage, just look at the percentages, pick the dominant color, throw away the percentage, and then represent the LAB value of that color, we do better. And the question was why. So actually, you can use the first two dominant colors to get a little better, but we wanted to know why you do that, why this happens, and we looked at the statistics of our segments. So if you look at the first dominant percentage of the first dominant color, in many cases it was close to 100%. And then so I mean, the second color sometimes was there, but third and fourth were almost non-existent. And that explains. Now, the advantage of having the LAB value is, for example, the sky may be darker than the water, so there is some information there.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
What's the vertical scale?
The vertical scale is the percentage of all in the segments. When if you look at all the in one segment, you have the percentage of the first color. But then if you average over all the segment database that you have, in what percentage of those cases you have 100% first dominant color? Okay, so they're both percentages. Now,
That would be a fraction.
30%.
a fraction, sorry. Yeah. We also looked at, if you have two colors, what is the color distance between them? Now, LAB distance, I don't have that much intuition on LAB distance, or I didn't have at some point, so let's see what they look like. I mean, mostly you have below, around 10 or below. So you see that the first two colors, when LAB is in around 10, is not a big difference. You need to go to the 20s and 30s before you get significant color difference. So these are the histograms of different images. Just randomly picked a few color compositions. So finally, well, we did some tests to make sure that we're not doing anything wrong. We tried decreasing the number of dominant colors, the fixed dominant colors, the quantized dominant colors. If you go from 15 to 11, doesn't make a big difference. If you go to more, you introduce dependencies. You don't want to do that, just to make sure we are not doing something wrong. So the final thing that the best performance we could get was a variation of LDA, k-means followed by LDA, using texture, the first two dominant colors, and actually added position. That helps with sky and water, for example, assuming that we have oriented images. These are the best results we have. Now, this is a hierarchical representation, so keep in mind that when we do natural versus man-made, it includes the other categories. Now, the question we asked at this point was, is there something we use our segmentation? So we justified our approach with the statistics of the segments, but we were interested, what if we had human segmentations? First of all, how do we compare with human segmentations? And is there an artifact of our algorithm? We said that, I mean, we tend to have one dominant color in many cases. Is that an artifact of our algorithm, or do humans do the same? So, University of California, Berkeley have Malik's group, Malik et al. Group. They have a very interesting database of segmentations online. I think it's still online, but anyway, we've been aware of this for many years. Look at different human segmentations. They are not the same. They tend to get the same areas, but sometimes the one will over-segment, the other won't. So what they proposed, a metric which is very interesting for comparing human segmentations, and they showed they're consistent if you allow mutual refinement. Anyway, we have all these segmentations, so we thought, let's do statistics on those segmentations. So here is another example. So we had 400 images with different content, segmented by 30 subjects, and each image was segmented by at least a few subjects. And collected statistics, and we were interested to compare them with our statistics. So one difference, if you look at the first dominant color percentage, is in the human segmentations, you don't have this high proportion of 100%. But otherwise, the shape is very similar. So this is not, I'm not sure how exactly to compare this, but what we did is ignore the 100% and then plotted the rest. Again, you have some discrepancy up here, but generally it's kind of a similar segmentation distribution. So maybe that's a good indication, we thought. And also, if you look at the distances between first and second dominant color, the human distribution seems very similar to our distributions. This is the talk I gave at the Human Vision Conference on statistics of natural images. So also, another thing that we thought would be interesting to do is, rather than use our segmentations, use the human segmentations, but use our features to do classification. Again, that's a test to see if we are way off, or if the human segmentations with our features did not work, it would mean that maybe our features are not so good. Or if we use if the human segmentations did a lot better, it would say that our segmentations need a lot more work. These look, the results seem very, very close. So I don't know. I think that's a good indication. But we did this study with the classification. It's a different set of images, so it's not directly, but it's amazing that they come about the same. So that was the comparison with human segmentations, and I think, well, we just have two variations of the approach, but no matter how you exactly do it, you get about the same percentages. So this is basically my talk. We talked about segmenting, labeling segments. You really want to label scenes. We've done it basically on the color and texture and position, but we really ignored spatial relationships between segments. There is no reason you should. That's the next thing we want to do, is utilize the layout of the image, and both for segment classification and overall scene classification. And of course, any other information you have, you should be able to combine it. So that's a natural thing to do. Now, as far as performance evaluation, we already tried some comparisons with human segmentations. You can do two things. One is compare your segmentations directly, and then also compare in the context of a retrieval system how well you do compared to human segmentation. So I think those are interesting to do. And of course, the most difficult problem, or the unsolved problem right now, is can we do the same for video? And of course, any computational issues. Again, if you go to video, you don't want your computation to increase per frame, but actually to exploit the temporal dependencies to even make it more efficient. So, yes.
You have this very simple texture model, right? With very, and that's necessary because you're doing
adaptive.
The estimation of the parameters on a very fine scale. But once you sort of put everything together in the segmentation, now you come back to a stage where you have potentially a lot of data to estimate the segmentation parameters, sort of a posteriori.
After, yeah.
Perhaps bootstrap a more, a better model. Do you think that might improve?
That's an interesting guess. Actually, even if you could improve the segmentation, or even if you don't care about improving the segmentation, the classification. Yeah, you could use more complicated.
Because it seems that the confusion is maybe because you're ignoring certain aspects. You're just basically looking at the orientation of the texture, right? Not at the frequencies or other.
Right. Yes, you could use more, and you can reinstate some of that structure of the water, maybe, and some of the more fine details in the textures. Maybe you can go back and yes, by all means. This is, this was a simple thing to try, and again, we wanted to know, do our segmentations contain semantic information, and I think we have demonstrated that. Now, there is another interesting comparison with the literature. There are a lot of techniques where they try to detect many categories, like 500 categories. And then they report, and the state of this is they're proud of this. This is because it's better than anybody else, like 15% recall. I don't know if that's useful for anything. I mean, the techniques can be very impressive. I mean, but I think our difference is also that we are not overly ambitious in let's detect every possible category. Let's extract the most important categories and the ones we can discriminate and aim for higher recall and precision. So, but that's also something that makes a comparison of literature very difficult because obviously you cannot compare, 10 features to 500 features.
So how separable is the algorithm? It seems to me like all the multi-spatial or multi-layer things could be separated off into different calculations, or do they depend on each other?
Well, you need the segmentation. In the segmentation, there is fair amount of, there is parallelism there, but you need, it's fairly sequential in that sense.
Okay, but you could parallelize.
You could parallelize quite a bit because, I mean, first of all, maybe if you're doing classification, you don't care about the precise borders. We are trying to get the best segmentation we could. But if you, maybe the crude segmentation is not that bad if you want to save computation. There are quite a few things you can do, but it's not like everything can be done. I mean, the stages have to be in sequence. But within each stage, you have a lot. Sorry?
But the individual stages are separable, perhaps?
There is a fair amount of things that, because it's adaptive, localized, so you can make some compromise. You can work on different parts of the image separately, for example. So there are a lot of interesting questions in making it more efficient. Yes?
It seems like the other big direction in image classification is using shape as opposed to texture, color, and so on. And you didn't do anything here with shape?
Well, but having the precise borders could help with shape. Right. We didn't do
Would you use the shape of the border or local shape features within a region? Or how would
within a region? No, we didn't. No, we don't do that. No.
How would you think about integrating shape with what you've got?
We don't really do that. I mean, you're saying within the texture, shapes in the texture, like textons.
So, like things like motorcycle recognition. I mean, people use the distribution of local SIFT features to say this is a motorcycle.
Yeah, we don't. No, with texture we have very crude texture in that it's like wavelet coefficients rather than specific. Yes.
You outlined this future work, the associated text, and Michelle's referring to a body of work where they've attempted to data mine text associated with images in order to label extracted segments like motorcycles, people,
right.
trees, and so forth. Could you speak to that at all?
No, I'm not sure I understand. Our goal is for training and we have manually labeled segments, but our goal is to label the segments, but it's a different approach than doing it by looking at the texture elements within a region. I mean, our texture model is fairly simple.
Well, it's really future work. You've
right.
now extracted these segments.
Yeah.
You've got a means to use texture parameters as well as color to try to isolate different
right.
regions of the image. And now you want to associate those image regions with things like...
Oh, you can use other things, yes.
Text,
like thousands of categories instead of 10 categories.
Right. You can add other features then.
In the work so far may have little to do with the features that you'll use in future.
Sure. You could do that. Yeah. I mean, and there is also the shape of the segment that could be significant. If I mean, like horizon is straight line. I mean, you could have some. I mean, maybe the outline of a tree is significant. I mean, some tree may have a different outline than another type of tree.
Well, a lot of those motorcycle segments were shaped like the outline of a motorcycle, so, yeah.
Oh, so you're looking at that, or you're looking within, like the spikes in the wheel, maybe, or both, right? Well, you can do that. I mean, I don't see why not. Actually, what we could do, and talking about the thing I mentioned earlier, is if you have some metric for texture similarity, maybe you can, now that you have isolated more or less uniform textures, you can try similarity of textures across images and say, well, this image contains a region that has similar texture to that image, and maybe they're related.
Well, for that matter, you're using textures that you've extracted independently of any perspective pitch that they may have. But since you now have isolated this textured region, you could look at the spatial frequencies in the texture to try to estimate shape from texture.
Yeah.
You can extract more texture parameters from that
Right.
region. Instead of having to use it to classify the region in the first place, you've already got a region to start.
Right. We for the time being, we stayed with the same features that you use for segmentation to do the classification, but nothing says that you have to use the same features. 0.5% accuracy, because if you're trying to help a consumer classify their images, if a few images are wrong, they can do it manually, but you don't want to do all your images manually. So it's more forgiving, the problem.
It's a better application area than tumor diagnosis.
I mean, we were talking at Motorola, actually, about that, and we were saying, tell us, what is the goal before we even had any results? I mean, if we can get, what is a reasonable number to get? I mean, if it's 60%, are you happy? Should it be 80%? And I mean, if it's a lot, above 50%, it's beginning to be useful. So that's an interesting aspect of the problem. Thank you.